question.
If he wins.
In general, not talking about November, are you a good loser?
I'm not a good loser. I don't like to lose. I don't lose too often. I don't like to lose.
But are you gracious?
You don't know until you see. It depends. I think mail-in voting is going to rig the election. I really do.
Are you suggesting that you might not accept the results of the election?
I have to see. Look.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
I was extremely concerned that only 82% of Americans thought it was important if a losing candidate does not concede the elections in the presidential elections or any election in the United States. I would have expected the number to be more like 98%, particularly because we are taught in schools that elections are the heart of democracy. It is the mechanism through which we, as voters, as citizens, seek out our representation in government. So 82% is quite low. It also shows that you've got, on average, 18%, again, 1/5 of the population, that is challenging the legitimacy of elections. And once you get to that point, and if it continues to grow, then elections will not be the way that we resolve political disputes. And if you look at other countries, that's when you're inviting violence as a means of resolving disputes. So overall, I'm very concerned with that low number, 82%, and the high number of those who think it's unimportant if the losing candidate will not concede the elections. When we ask ourselves, why is it only 82%? And who are those people who are among those 18%, sometimes a little higher depending on the demographic group? We see some trends. So first is the lower income and the lower education is producing numbers in the range of 20%, 23%. And that, as a professor, that makes me feel that we need to do a better job in education and in educating our population that elections are extremely important for democracy and for stability, because every society has political disputes. Every society is going to have disagreement, and elections is the peaceful way to resolve those disagreements. The other trend that is unsurprising is that more Trump supporters believe it's not important if the losing candidate doesn't concede, whereas less Biden supporters think it is very important if the losing candidate does not concede. And I think that shows that Trump's propaganda, and it is propaganda, of he's hedging his bets and that it's working. He's telling his followers, if I lose, don't accept the results. So he's playing a dangerous game, and what he's doing in terms of causing citizens to question the legitimacy of elections before they even happen based on the outcome is eroding our democracy in the long run. So long after he's gone, if we still have this 18% that could grow to 20, 25, even higher percent of people who don't think that losing candidates should have to concede elections, then we have a major democratic crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's interesting because on one hand, of course, we would like to see that percentage be higher. But one of the things we know during the Trump administration, and even before this, that political polarization is so extreme. So it's interesting that around 80% of Americans do tend to agree on anything. This is kind of similar to when we had a discussion about the United States Postal Service. It was a large percentage of people across different divides, politically, race, gender, education, and age, who agreed that the United States Postal Service should be funded, that it was important to them. And I think in this context, we are seeing a large percentage of Americans agreeing that there needs to be someone conceding And also the fact that we see it across political divides. Surely Republicans are less likely than Democrats. But I tend to think about a quote from Douglas when he conceded to Lincoln in 1861. And one of the things that he said that always stood out to me is partisan feeling must yield to patriotism. And I think that's the moment we're in right now. That it's interesting. Al Gore made the same statement to President Bush when he lost. And so we think about these contentious elections in history and essentially what they've taught us. And to the point made, I mean, one of the things that Trump is aiming to do, I mean, his actions aren't helpful at all. They're actually extremely hurtful. His language about a rigged game is a problem. His language around aiming to delegitimize the United States Postal Service, but even before that, aiming to delegitimize science and government more broadly, that I was actually a bit surprised that the percentage wasn't lower of people who thought that the loser should concede, simply given the sort of things that we've heard from Trump.
So I tend to disagree with you on the number, and perhaps I'm a bit more idealistic in thinking that I do a lot of comparative work, right? And I study authoritarian regimes in Egypt and in the Middle East in general. And my perception of America is somewhat idealistic in comparison, insofar as I would think that even if people were unhappy with the outcome, that they would at least recognize that the losing candidate has to concede. And I'm worried that 82%, which represents only 4/5 of the population, is dangerously too close to a tipping point. Now, are we at a tipping point? No. But these types of political trends are incremental. And my concern is, will Trump push us through his rhetoric as he gets more desperate as we get closer to the elections, especially if the polls start to show that he's sliding? We know that there are no red lines for him. He will do what he will engage in a scorched earth campaign, even if it means threatening American democracy. And so my concern is when I see those numbers, it signals to me that his propaganda is working, his message is working, and that number may go down. We might go from 82 to 78 to 75. It also just makes me question the American education system and the American political system, because I would think that we were secure enough in our beliefs, right, in electoral politics and our belief in legitimacy of the elections, that even if one person came and started telling us, hey, you shouldn't think it's important if the losing candidate doesn't concede, that Americans would know better. And obviously 82% do. But again, I'm really uncomfortable with that number, primarily because I've seen what happens in authoritarian regimes. And once you go down that path, it's really hard to reverse course.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think part of my point is I was thinking that Trump would have been able to make even more headway, particularly from a political divide standpoint. I mean, yes, there is a small gap between Republicans and Democrats, but some of the other polls that the Hill have done shows huge divides between Republicans and Democrats. And I think to your point about the people who are more likely to be low income, less educated, I think that also just speaks to a level of angst. And really, it might more so be about distrust in the process compared to whether or not a loser should congratulate the winner in that regard. And I think aiming to tease out those two things are important.